Ready? Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, February the 25th, 2014. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Rogers is no longer here. Ms. Simon.
She's here somewhere.
Okay, and Ms. Conley.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Is there any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, there is none.
Okay, moving on to item 4. Madam, items referred to the committee. Item 2014-0035. Madam Clerk, will you read the item, please?
Resolution number 2014-0035, a resolution confirming the county executive's appointment of Mark A. Parks, Jr. upon his taking the oath of office as fiscal officer of Cuyahoga County and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you. Mr. Parks has been named interim fiscal officer, and he's been acting for, I'm not sure, a number of months. And his formal declaration was sent over by the executive to name him, and so now pursuant to the charter, the council has to confirm that appointment by the executive. So what we've done in the past is had the nominee or the appointee make sort of an opening statement, and then we'll go and ask questions. I'm sure council people have a number of questions. So Mr. Parks, if you'd like to come up, you're on the hot seat. We'd like to welcome you to council this afternoon, and you may be seated, and we'd like to hear just some of the general opening statement regarding in support of your candidacy. And you've been employed by the county for how long?
8 years and 9 months.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, esteemed members of council, county executive, staff, and guests. It is with a great deal of honor that I approach you and present my qualifications to be the fiscal officer of Cuyahoga County. What I would like to do today is, we've been here before, so you kind of know who I am, but briefly go over my educational background, my professional background, some of the recent accomplishments, awards and recognitions, and where we are today and what we would like to do moving forward. And with that, shall I begin?
Yes.
Okay. I always like to start off that I was born and raised here in Cuyahoga County, not that people that are not from here are less relevant, but I think it shows my dedication to service for the people of this county. When we have problems such as customer service or the phone calls are too long or the wait time, it's not like I go home somewhere else. I'm at BJ's and people are asking me about their tax bills or their dog license. So I'm here, so I'm vested in the county. They hit me on Facebook, they text me. So when we have problems, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that we take care of them. I was educated here as well. I grew up in East Cleveland. I went through all of the East Cleveland schools and graduated from the Shaw High School, and I was a member of the Shaw Marching Band.
What'd you play?
I played the trumpet, and I actually played all strings and all brass. I was quite talented in music at that time. Composed and, arranged. Sure. But
You bring music to our ears.
immediately leaving Shaw High, my father was a real estate broker, so instead of summer vacation, I had to take real estate courses at John Carroll. And in the fall, I began classes at Baldwin Wallace College, which is now a university. At BW, I majored in political science and business administration. I got a Bachelor of Arts degree there. After working a number of years in banking, I saw a position called controller that I kind of liked. That was an accounting position. So I took additional coursework at Cleveland State University, equivalent to a an accounting degree, and then I subsequently sat for the CPA exam, which I passed. And just a little fact, only 10% of the people who ever take the CPA pass it.
Yeah, the problem with the CPA exam, you can go back and take parts. The bar exam is like one shot. You know, you can go back and take parts for that. Yeah, Mr. Boyle is clapping for that.
I'm outnumbered by lawyers today. So upon getting the CPA, I immediately started working in that field. But I also, at some point, started a business in a financial services company. And for that, I was licensed in life, accidental, and health and variable products license, as well as property and casualty. And why that's relevant is because in finance, we try to mitigate risk and eliminate them. And if you know insurance, and I'm sure Mr. Germana can speak to this, Councilman Germana, excuse me, insurance is all about eliminating the risk and covering the risk. So I have a great deal of information and knowledge in that field from being licensed. I was also licensed in securities, 6, 26, and 63. Series 6 is a license that allows you to sell securities. 63 allows you to sell securities throughout the United States with a reciprocal license, and a 26 is a principal. So I was able to supervise and train people who sold securities. So I have a great deal of knowledge as it relates to securities. As I mentioned, I had a small company. It was actually a regional CPA firm. We had offices in Cleveland, Beechwood, and Akron. And during that process, I was recruited by the President's Council, which is the, I'll say, 15 to 20 largest African-American businesses in the region, with many of them with revenues in excess of $50 million for their emerging entrepreneur training. I went through that program, and then I eventually closed the company and came to work here at the county. And one of the things I went through is the Leadership Academy at the Cleveland State University, where subsequently I was awarded the Dr. David Sweet Distinguished Elected Official Award. So my name is actually one of the people on the wall at Cleveland State, and that was awarded to me based on my efforts toward regionalism. The other executive training program I went through is called the Career Executive Program, and that was a collaboration with Cleveland State, Case Western Reserve, and Cuyahoga County. And back then, up-and-coming, people who were identified as up-and-coming leaders went through this program. So I went through that one as well. 2006, I received a MBA from the University of Phoenix in e-commerce, and that's very relevant in our world today, as many of the payments and methodologies are online commerce. And this year, I went through training as a treasurer. Part of the state requirement is that you must sit with an acting treasurer for 12 hours. So I sat with the treasurer of Franklin County for a day and met his staff, went through the processes, looked at the metrics, and somewhat compared our organization together. And then I missed an hour, so I had to go meet with another treasurer, and the state dictates who you must go see. So I went to Medina and trained with that treasurer as well. I also went through 6 hours of training from the state treasury. So now I'll move on into professional experience. And as I mentioned, I have been with the county for 8 years and 9 months. I started in the Office of Budget and Management as a budget analyst. I was there 4.5 years. Half of that I was in the judicial area. The other half I was in general government. The salient point there is that general government is all of the departments that the fiscal officer is now responsible for overseeing. So I'm very acquainted with the budgeting operations of all those departments from a budgetary standpoint and operations as a budget analyst. After 4.5 years, I was promoted in the Office of Budget and Management to Financial System Administrator. So I became the person who implemented, trained, and was the help desk for the budget system for the entire county. So given my accounting background, budgetary knowledge, and computer knowledge, I think that I'm a very viable person for any position, given those three as a mix. Part of that position, I participated in the medical mart financing. So I was on the team that did the bond deals and basically did everything that was required for that building. And it was more of a complex structure because the economy was tanking, and we had these governmental bonds. They were called BABs, Build America bonds, and there was different types of Build America bonds, and you really had to know the intricacies of those products in order to implement them. And the Medical Mart was the largest bond offering project for the county to date. Moving on, in banking where I grew up, in many corporations, they take their management staff through a rotation. So you go through the different departments and you actually serve as an employee for a designated period of time so you can learn the intricacies of those departments. Well, through my experience since the new form of government has started, I've been through a rotation, even though it wasn't on purpose. I started in January of 2011 as the interim fiscal officer, but the initial stop for that was in the recorder's office. And every office that I stop into, I do a detailed analysis. I meet with the managers, I ask questions, I analyze the operation and learn what's going on. So I started in the recorder's office. I was there a couple of months until my predecessor came into existence. And at that point, I became the director of special projects. That was May. So I spent about 5 months in the recorder, and then subsequently about 2 or 3 months in the auditor's office. When my predecessor came, I became the director of special projects. And as you may be aware of, we have a process called county stat where we use metrics and data to manage by objective. I was in charge of that for the fiscal office. So I did all the metrics. We got the information from the different departments. We would shoot back out questions. We didn't just get the metrics and put them in a presentation. We asked questions, why and where do we go and what do you need to do? So I managed that process. I was also responsible for organizational development. The organizational chart that started the fiscal office was developed by me. I worked with the transition committee that was in existence before this organization, and I continue to facilitate the organization of the fiscal office as we move forward. I also was the deputy CFO, so in the absence of my predecessor, I signed and met and took his place if he was in fact out of the office. We also did a special project, the disparity study, and I'll talk to that later. And then I was the controller of the fiscal office during the budget and watching the financial operations for fiscal. Subsequently became the county controller, very instrumental in getting out all of the financial statements from 2009 through 2012, and we are at this point current. Following that stint, I became the treasurer and everything that's involved there, and here we are today as the fiscal officer. So I've had quite a thorough round of experience within the county government here at Cuyahoga County. So that's here. Prior to being here, I was a CFO at the Lake Metropolitan Housing Authority. I was there for 3 years. I would say some of the most important things I did was I computerized the organization. They had a system, but they had not properly implemented it. So I worked with the consultants to implement that system. The other thing, and it's one of my specialties, and that's why I appreciate what Councilman Miller has done, is policies and procedures. I still run into people from that organization who say, if it hadn't have been for the procedures that you wrote out, we wouldn't know what to do. So they're still using that document to this day. Prior to that, I was 2 years as a CFO at the Cleveland Technical Assistance Organization. This was a HUD grant, and we operated out of CMHA. So the Technical Assistance Organization they gave $2.5 million to residents of CMHA, and they wanted them to start businesses so that they could become economically sustainable. My task was to be the CFO, payroll, pay the bills, accounts payable, receivables, et cetera. But also I was their technical assistance person to help them set up corporations, businesses, do business plans, et cetera. Prior to that, I was a CFO at a very large Head Start agency. Even though Head Start is a nonprofit, the funding comes from county, which is municipal, state, and federal. So again, I have a great deal of knowledge in the area of governmental finance. I also served 6 years as in governmental financial oversight as a finance chair in Orange Village. I was council president for 3 years and finance chair for 6. I have 5 years of experience teaching at the collegiate level. I taught governmental accounting, so once again, there we are. I have a great deal of experience in the governmental accounting. So that's almost 20 years of governmental finance experience, but the teaching and the council overlap. So I want to talk about just a few recent accomplishments, and we're really talking about since September 26, when I stepped into this position. It's quite busy. One of the things that happened on day one, we did the largest tax lien sale in the history of Cuyahoga County at $15.6 million. We brought in a substantial amount of money for our schools, libraries, and municipalities. We got the biennial budget passed for 2014 and 15. We also had 3 bond deals, 2 of which are completed. The Steelyard Commons was a $4 million deal, and the Westin Hotel, 5.7. I think both of those were great projects. And we're working on the Flats East Bank deal, which is a $17 million project. And I just want to point out, as you look at the activity, one bond deal can consume you. With the number of conference calls and meetings and discussions, it's quite busy, and we had 3 going on at one time in addition to everything else that I will mention. We also, on December 31st, submitted the first comprehensive annual financial report to be completed by Cuyahoga County since 2006. And the auditors made the comment that it's called a CAFR, that's the acronym, is the most thorough reporting that any government can do. So we're back at that level where we are producing CAFRs, which is a very comprehensive annual report. We also had 2 moves while we're doing all of this. And the fiscal office was probably affected the most because we're actually split. And we also had to deal with customers. The fiscal office probably sees more customers than most, and we're in 2 separate locations. So there was a lot of operations discussions that we had in order to do that well. Then we had the third billing, which is a supplemental billing on top of the tax billing, the 2 standards that are dictated by the Ohio Revised Code. And that's an aggressive way of bringing in more money. And then we, of course, had our first half collection. Now, one of the things that the fiscal office has talked about is becoming a model for other governments. So these 2 projects that I'm going to talk to you about presents how we've done that. As you may know, and certainly Councilman Jones is aware of the disparity study. Our peers in local government have paid in excess of $800,000 for these disparity studies. Working with a program officer in our office, Ms. Lastry, we designed a process, and Councilman Jones and the committee, we designed a process that allowed us to design a study that will be as thorough, at least as thorough as anyone else's, and not at $800,000 and above, but at below $200,000. And the reason why that's important is you have to understand disparity studies. First of all, people don't like them. So there are people who are going to say, well, the best people should just get the job, and why are we wasting all this money? And there are people who will say, well, we already knew it was a disparity, so why are you spending all that money? So we thought it was very important that we were very efficient in doing that and spending less money there. That way, we could take that additional $500,000-$600,000 and put it into programs and contracts versus spending that money on a study. The other groundbreaking, I don't want to say groundbreaking, it's just what people who have MBAs should be doing. We had the Department of Senior and Adult Services. Again, Mrs. Lastry and I went on this project, and this is outside of the scope of fiscal, but when we went to DSAS, we initially a consultant was engaged, and we said that we believe that we could do this as effectively as a consultant. When we went to DSAS, they have 4 separate departments, basically. They have, the main one is protective service, where the seniors come in if they're having danger, but there was 4 others. They had 4 separate areas of intake, and if you were a senior and you called one line, you would only get information from that one line. And if there was additional needs, the staff, some did not have the training to ask you the questions to direct you to the other services that were right there in that office. We transitioned that process into a central intake line. We cross-train the staff so that they're all skilled in every area, at least knowledgeable enough to speak on it. And they designed a checklist that they go through with the seniors, so when a senior calls, they are guided to every service that they are eligible through, and that's through one line. So that's somewhat outside of the scope, but that talks to being a model for others to emulate. We are a model of efficiency in the things that we've done. The next is the infrastructure program, which Councilman Schron is very aware of, and the infrastructure program is a win-win situation. Because of the property valuation decrease for some of the cities, they lost some of their borrowing capacity. So Executive Fitzgerald, wanting to help out the municipalities, came up with a program where we would help them by investing in their projects. So the Treasury, by Ohio Revised Code, is allowed to purchase municipal debt. So we structured a program where we'll be able to lend money to the municipalities so that they could do their projects. The county, in turn, will get a higher rate of return on their money, and everyone wins in that process. So that, again, is somewhat groundbreaking, but I can't claim that as my personal idea. The other is online contracts. One of our challenges here is always with dealing with customers coming into the office. So many of the taxpayers need payment programs or payment plans so they can pay in installments. So what we've designed is a way that people could do it online and they don't have to leave their homes. They could send in the information, they get their payment plan set up. That's more convenient for them, and it's also decreasing the amount of foot traffic that we have in our office. And eventually we want to have the perfect balance, because there are people who will never do online stuff and never, do those type of things, but there are people who want that. So that's another thing. I work with our director, Shelley Davis, on BOR restructuring. As you know, the charter change made that different. And we've reduced tax delinquencies from 12%, and that was in July, and we're now down at 7.47%. So we've done a great job with delinquencies. We also did the Top Dog contest, and hopefully next year I'll be in, a little more involved, and maybe I could bring my dog. She's kind of bad, but but we had fun, right, Councilman Simon? So, and that's it. That's what I've done since I've been interim in those 4 or 5 months. And as it relates to our recent awards and our recognitions, I got a Good Works Award from the Urban League and the Consortium of African American Organizations. I have been recognized for my achievements by the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the Cuyahoga Faith Center, and by State Rep John Barnes. I am participating on the following boards and commissions: the Board of Control, Contracts and Purchasing Board, the Budget Commission, the Board of Revision, the Cuyahoga County Debarment and Review Board, the Audit Committee, the Cuyahoga County Community Improvement Corporation, and I go to the Investment Advisory Committee, but at this point I'm a non-member. Some of the community activism I've done while I've held these positions: we have spoke to 5 very large church organizations. One of the things that we found out in Treasury is that there are nonprofits and churches who don't understand the process of becoming tax exempt. And if they don't do it correctly, they end up on our delinquent tax rolls. So we have gone out and talked to those organizations, and we have discussed having a symposium for those groups so that they know exactly what they need to do in order to become tax exempt. We have also met with the NAACP, the Urban League, and the President's Council, as well as other small business organizations in order to talk to them about our efforts of inclusion. Part of the disparity study is that we must have focus groups and have people participate from the community. So we just wanted to get out there in front of it and make sure that people were aware of what we're doing as it relates to inclusion. I spoke at the Brattonall Residents Club on Treasury operations and our multiple payment options. I spoke for the National Black MBA Association on courageous leadership. And I also had the opportunity to speak at the prestigious Yale Club in New York City, representing large governments participating in tax lien sales. As it relates to external activism, I am a board member on the Shaw High Alumni Association. Shaw High Alumni Association, I would say, is probably one of the most successful urban alumni associations in the country. We have given our future alumni at Shaw High tens of thousands, if not $100,000 in scholarships. We gave the band money, mock trial. We even had a signing day where the people who passed their exams where they were going to college. And unfortunately, there are actually homeless students in our area, and we have, helped them out as well. I was selected to be on the Orange Schools Advisory Committee. They were looking at how we move forward successfully in the new age. And I was also selected by State Auditor Yost to be on the Regional Advisory Committee for his office. Some of the priorities as we move forward, assuming that I am confirmed, and maybe you should take these priorities if I'm not, is to increase the revenues. We understand that we're in a down revenue environment, so we have to be creative of how we'll generate more money to come into our organization. So one of the things, and I'll give you just a couple of for instances, is rental registration. One of our directors worked in Summit County, and when they began to enforce rental registration, which is on our books, they increased their revenues by $200,000 a year. And that's a much smaller county, so we could probably do better than that. Also, I've been alerted that in other counties, some of the inspections that our weights and measures crew do are paid for by the people who are being inspected. And given a proposal by our director, that department could potentially be sustainable just based on those fees that they will receive from that. We have to really get that dog license and top dog contest booming so that we can increase our dog revenues. And this year, we actually sold more titles from our auto title division than any time in the past. But we're being very aggressive. We are proposing, and we're in the process of moving the office right next to Bureau of Motor Vehicles that is moving in that Garfield Mall over there, the one that had the toxic problems. But we have done all the research, and we won't be at risk. But we are also talking to car dealers. We're actually implementing a pickup service, so we could go pick up their work, process their titles, and bring them back. I was purchasing a car, my son was purchasing a car, and I asked the person at the dealership, are you using Cuyahoga County for your titles? And he said, yes. The office on Northfield. I said, no, that's Summit County. But nevertheless, so we're going after the business in Cuyahoga, and we're trying to build that book of business. So if you recall, in this year, the 2014-15 budget, the title division contributed $500,000 to the general fund. So the more we build that, the more that we could put that money into the general fund to subsidize the operations for the people in need. And the other is our microfilm center just recently, we did a big contract with Geauga County where we're doing scanning. So that's part of the regional initiative to go out and get additional jobs outside of the county. You're providing them with a good service and also bringing in revenue. And then the other is special revenue funds, and that's not generating revenue, but it's kind of effectively using what we have. For years, let me just go back and talk about a special revenue fund.
Okay, because there's a lot of questions and we've got some time restraints, so.
I got a few more
Okay,
seconds.
all right.
So a special revenue fund.
You got a dog, so that helps a little bit.
I've had a dog every year of my life except when I was in college.
Okay.
And I knew some dogs in college. So.
Well, you were those yeah, but aren't you an Omega dog? Aren't you Omega as a dog?
Yes, I'm Omega man, ma'am.
Okay, all right. That's an insight.
Yeah, so we have funds that are sitting in our coffers that were collected for various reasons. There were laws passed that said maybe you need money for computerization, maybe you need money for this tax certificate, but we have piles of money that haven't been utilized in years. So I'm going to charge the Office of Budget and Management of looking at the ORC and seeing how we could free up some of these monies, because if you understand the concept of a special revenue fund, you cannot take that money out unless it's for the statutory reason. So we just need to make sure that we can interpret that and free up some of these funds and make sure that it gets to the people in need. We are looking at written procedures for all departments, and certainly Councilman Miller has gave us a head start on that. But it's not just, so there's a couple of reasons why you have written procedures. One is continuity and sustainability. We don't want to be in a situation where a person leaves their job and nobody knows what to do. But more important, we are in the process of purchasing two systems, a tax system and a ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System, which is all encompassing. We must document what we do, because the worst thing that we could do is speed up bad processes. So what we want to do is do the procedures, analyze them, and make sure as we move forward we are as efficient as we should be. We just don't want to computerize what we currently do. So writing the procedures will do that. One thing you may have heard of, and we get quite a few calls about our service. I won't say quite a few, but we get some. So one of the things that we've instituted is what is called secret shopper in industry. So we have some protocols. We just put out a phone answering protocol, and we want people to be very professional. We want to make sure they give their department, their name, and they ask people how they could help them. And we also have the external offices in title. So what we've done is we have staff who are not well known to these people sometime, and they go out to like the title and they check off. What's the office look like? What's the staff look out? How receptive were they? They also make phone calls and have the same type of checklist where they say, did they give the proper greeting? Did they give their name? Did they answer quickly? So this will allow us to judge our service ourselves. And one of the things that we picked up, and I was on vacation last week and I just started looking at this data, is that our system is given the wrong amount of time. So just about every time it says, hold on, you have to wait for about 4 minutes. We found that every time is longer. So that's something that we need to address. And we have the hotel deal, which is very high on our system, on our radar. So I only have a few more items.
I'd like to get to the questions.
Okay.
Mr. Greenspan is getting itchy because he's got questions.
Okay, so moving forward, as I mentioned, we have the Enterprise Resource Planning System, and that's going to be heavily on fiscal. It involves quite a bit of us. The other thing that we would like to do is improve the communication with council and all stakeholders involved. I've reached out to some of you and plan on continuing to do that to see how fiscal office can be of better service to you. We would like to wow our residents, and if you give us the opportunity to do that, we would do that. We've also developed a fiscal-wide calendar. We have every date, every due date, every program, everything that's coming up in fiscal for the entire year. I'm not a micromanager, but I believe in taking care of the critical path. So if there is a due date coming up, I'll probably shoot an email to that manager about 60 days in advance and just say, where are we on this? And then they will start to update. And typically they just give me a rundown of where they are and they're on top of it. But we will all know what our dates are, and that will allow us to prepare for the busy seasons and everything else involved. We are also going to do training for new managers. We have people who are in management who have never managed. So it's important that they get that. And I mentioned the new phone protocol, and with that, I'll end.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Mr. Greenspan, do you want to start?
Sure. You know, Madam President's right. I did have a number of questions. I'm actually not going to ask any of the questions. I'm going to take a different tact. Mr. Parks has had the opportunity of serving as our acting fiscal officer since September. And I would reflect on his performance as fiscal officer. And so, casting your vote today, we have the hindsight of actually seeing performance, to which I'm not impressed. I did not vote for Gerald First for the same purpose. We saw Gerald First, having served in the capacity of clerk of courts, I was not impressed with what I saw then, and it proved out through his first 2 years in office a continuation of service to the county that served not to be as distinguished as we may have wanted it to be, resulting in some comments in various other reports. I am concerned that if Mr. Parks is not confirmed, the ramifications that it would have on us not having a fiscal officer, an interim fiscal officer. But that's not necessarily my overarching issue here. My overarching issue is to ensure that when I cast a vote to confirm someone for one of these positions, that I feel comfortable that we're attracting and identifying and hiring for the residents of this county the most qualified person to serve in that position. I just believe the performance we've seen thus far doesn't merit that level of support or comfort from me. I'm going to end with this simple word to my colleagues. Don't outthink your instincts when casting your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenspan. Ms. Conwell?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Parks. And, well, my first question, in the 12-hour training that you were required to complete, what was the time span that you had to complete this training?
They give you a 4-month period.
4 months. Okay. And in a 38-month stint with the county, you have been in 5 different positions, looking to embark on your 6th. Please share with this body why you were in agreement with these multiple changes and why you would now commit to fiscal officer.
Through the chair to the councilwoman, are you?
Just give the answer
Okay.
through the chair.
Are you speaking about since the new administration has come into play? Okay. Well, in talking to people in corporations, the most valuable people are the people who are troubleshooters and are able to go into a troubled area and set it straight. And I have had the opportunity to do that in a number of situations. I think it may speak to the confidence that the fiscal officer, the predecessor, as well as the executive have in me to put me in these very important positions and allow me to go there and run the office. So for me, my goal as a professional is to be as skilled as I can be. And since I plan on being at Cuyahoga County for a while, it's certainly worked out for me to be knowledgeable in a number of areas. My background has refined my skills because I've been a CFO for a number of years. And as I mentioned, I've taught governmental accounting, so I'm not really concerned about the basics anymore. It's really about learning intricacies and special areas within the government, so that served me well. So that's the answer to that question.
Mr. Schwan.
Thank you, Madam President. Tell me about your experiences of having installed an ERP system.
I have not installed an ERP system. I have been involved in several system conversions, but not an ERP, which is an overarching system for a very large organization.
Okay, so I'm just going back to what you had talked about earlier, the importance of an ERP system and how this is going to be an overarching, all-encompassing system
Right.
for the county. And I'm not going to find fault with whatever happened on our healthcare side, but we do know its impact of an ERP or an electronic system and its potential ramifications. Where would you expect to get the training in order to install an ERP system
Councilman,
between now and this, whatever time we have?
Councilman Sron, as I mentioned, I have not done an ERP because a ERP typically brings in other departments. With this install, we will probably start either with payroll or HR and then go to general ledger or the reverse. Now, I have been in several situations where I've been in a conversion in an accounting system, which is general ledger, accounts payable, receivable, and payroll. And as the fiscal officer, those are, and well, treasury would be one of them as well, but that would be the areas that I would be responsible for concentrating in, and I'm very comfortable with implementing financial systems.
My understanding of an ERP system is the two cornerstones of an ERP installation require the CFO to be one of the cornerstones, and the other cornerstones is the CIO.
Right.
It sounds to me as though, do you know where the status of the CIO is in installations of ERPs?
The fiscal officer and the CIO.
No, do you know where the status of the CIO, the Chief Information Officer? What's that person's background in regards to installing to ERP systems?
I cannot give you any details, but I do understand that the CIO was involved in the county in Florida, Broward County, in ERP installation.
Okay, so what we have is we have one of the two in place. It sounds to me as far as the importance to which, as you have already alluded to, how critical this is going to be. What's your length of time that you anticipate an ERP system would take to be installed?
The quotes that we've been given are from 18 to 24 months, but we have done, we did pretty thorough process as we evaluated the vendors, and it is taking longer based on the respondents that we have from the other counties and organizations that we have looked at. So it could be in excess of 24 months. So that's why the more efficient we are in documenting our processes, the better the process, because that process alone could take 6 months to a year to make sure that we document everything as it should be.
And what's the brands of ERP package you're looking at right now?
I think I'm going to give you a lifeline and let you call a friend. Mr. Fitzgerald has indicated he wanted to chime in.
I don't know that he needs, I don't know that we're even friends, but but I respect him a lot, and I don't know that he needs my help with it. But I would say this, is that I became interested in the ERP process. I've challenged my staff to come up with something. Mr. Mowry has some experience in Broward County. They implemented one. There is not a single public entity in Ohio that has done an ERP of any size or scale. Not one. The state's never done it. The county's never done it. There's not a single city that has ever done it. Now, there are some private sector corporations that have done it. So as we started this process, and I would just say, Councilman, the typical way that public entities, none of which are in Ohio, by the way, have embarked on ERPs is they let out an enormously expensive contract to somebody like Accenture or somebody like that and say, come tell us how to do an ERP. It can cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's enormously expensive. I can tell you two corporations that have done it locally are Eaton Corporation and Forest City, both multi-billion-dollar organizations. We decided to do something different. As opposed to coming to council, and we've had some of these discussions from the council, but it's certainly a germane topic for today. Instead of coming to council and saying, here, will you let out an enormous consulting contract to some national consulting firm? We put together a team of people inside county government and loaned executives. And who were those individuals? Mr. Mowry, Mr. Steen when he was still here, Mr. Parks, some other folks from IT and fiscal, and then we also used some loaned executives. And they're coming up with a process as we eventually get some outside help to start to implement that. But it's still in the planning stages. But I would just never suggest that the fiscal officer of this county or of any government entity in Ohio would be somebody that is I mean, it would be nice, I suppose, if they had done an ERP before, but you're talking about something that has never been done by any public entity in Ohio before. And I just wouldn't want there to be the implication that because we have an in-house team that's been working on this, and we have loaned executives, and eventually we'll have some consulting folks that we involved with this, that means that Mr. Parks is deficient somehow in what his duties are, because this is something the county has never attempted before, or any other county. And I would just add one more thing, Madam President, if I could, and that is in response to something that Councilwoman Conwell asked. I just want to make it clear, because Mark is somebody who is pretty humble about his assignments and carrying out his assignment. Pretty humble, except for his musical ability, which he's not humble about. He's a pretty humble person. He's done a number of tasks because we asked him to. We asked him to be the fiscal officer on an interim basis, and he did it without complaint. We asked him to take over the recorder's office. He didn't even mention some of the individual assignments. We went through and asked him to analyze the efficiency of our auto title because we wanted to make some cuts there, and he went there and analyzed the auto title bureaus. And he's been a utility person for us. So when we needed something done, he goes, he does it, and comes back and he gets the job done. What he mentioned about county stat, that is incredibly detail-oriented. So I know that Mr. Steen, who is very good at making public presentations, was talking about the data, but a lot of that data was captured and analyzed and put in a form to present it by Mr. Parks and his team. And that's why he's done 6 things, because every time he'd get one job done and he'd put a fire out somewhere else, we would say, okay, Mark, you've done that. Thank you very much. Can you now go do this? I just don't want there to be any implication that he's somehow unable to hold a position within the county, because every time he gets something done, we've asked him to do something else. I'm sorry to take up so much time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
As I recall, I got cut off. In deference to the county executive, you were the one who said how important it was to have this installed. And so and in deference again to the county executive, I have installed through our corporation numerous ERP packages, and the 2 cornerstones are the CFO and the CIO. So with that, if we have not found anybody in the state of Ohio that's done it, I was not chastising anybody who'd done the looking part. But speaking of looking, now it's my understanding that you were looking, that you did apply for the recent job in Shaker Heights. Is that?
That is not correct. That is
correct?
a rumor that came to me so many times. I have no idea where it came from.
So you did not make an application?
No, I guess there was a gentleman from here who applied, and I think he got it.
Yeah, he did. That's correct. But
Yeah,
there was a rumor out there,
me.
and I figured
Yeah, they
you're
made
here.
me cakes and everything else, but no, I had not applied for that
Very
position.
good. I just thought I would at least ask the question, because there was a rumor floating around up here that you had made an application. Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Parks, thank you. Congratulations on your nomination to one of the most important Article 5 offices that we have. What changes to finance and budgeting procedure do you believe need to be made within the coming year?
Well, Councilman Miller, the ones that I listed as far as the procedures, I think is very important. But one of the things that we'll be talking about, assuming that I move forward, is the audit. And I also, in many situations, have come into a place where they're First, let me back up. Our audit was fine, because even if in nonprofit, for-profit, or governmental, if you have an unqualified audit, that is what counts. I mean, the shareholders, the funders for nonprofits, and the rating agencies for governmental entities are concerned with that unqualified report. But beyond that, as you all know, there's a management letter and there's findings. So one of the things that we will do is aggressively address the findings and recommendations that the Auditor of State has recommended so that we continue to minimize that to the point that we have an extremely clean audit. And I will say that I have done that in more than one organization. It's not something that happens overnight, but it's certainly something that will put us in a better position to continue to move forward. The other thing, and I passed it out, and I guess I could jump to that. You all should have this organizational chart. Did you get that? Okay, so if you're looking at this organizational chart, and keeping in mind this is for operating, this is not the chart that dictates who reports to who necessarily, but the structure that says currently is a very flat organization, and it has become dated. Understanding that when the fiscal office first became into existence, there was no fiscal office, and we brought together 3 elected officials in 4 departments and came up with the fiscal office. Moving forward more efficiently, if you look at the page, the second page that says proposed, we've broke it down into 3 divisions. So if you look at the first division, which is financial, you got Treasury, OBM, financial reporting, OPD, and internal audit. This is for a meeting. This group of individuals have very similar discussions. It's about money, it's about general ledger, reconciliation, purchasing, and audit and accounting rules. We'll meet with that division instead of having this big conglomerate meeting where some people are listening to things that are not necessarily directly related to them. The second level is the real estate services division, real property appraisal, transfer and conveyance, board of revision, and you'll note that there is an asterisk by the treasurer because that person would also participate in this level. That group also has very similar discussions, tax valuations, appraisals, bills, collections, so they will meet. And then at the bottom is somewhat an eclectic mix. You have consumer affairs, microfilm, auto title, and general service. Call center just kind of fell in there. But what is common about those is that they generate revenue. So we want to start to have conversations about how do we generate more revenue. So we may have entrepreneurial type meetings in that division. So this is a more effective breakdown of that department that will help us move forward faster. And the other thing, given that I would be confirmed, is it puts me more in touch with the directors and the managers in those departments. As we make this transition, they need to be accustomed to my management style. So the more face time they have with me, I think would be the better. So I hope that addresses some of your concerns.
Okay. I looked again at the financial policies legislation that's proposed for the reporting requirements that I believe are the most important in improving the council's access to needed information to manage the finance and budget process, and it includes the following. One is completing the annual audit on time by September 30th of the following year. Second is quarterly reports being presented within 30 days after the end of each quarter and including year-to-date budget to actuals. Third is monthly reports, not in full detail, but identifying key trends. Fourth is presentation of a reserve for loan losses and forgivable loans. And finally, a submission of the budget certificate to the Budget Commission by December 31st of each year. And my question is whether you support these provisions as being part of the legislation.
I do. There have been some requests by the department managers to maybe soften or eliminate some of the dates. For instance, as it relates to the annual audit, That one is out of our control. So if you recall the last couple of years, there was nothing we could do, but we could not meet that guideline because it was all on the auditor of state to get that done. One of the ones that you mentioned were the quarterly reports, and we talked about budget to actuals, and you know, we will have to have more detailed discussions about that, but there's a challenge there because we could easily provide you with both of those. We could provide you with a great report that would come from our Office of Budget and Management out of the BRASS system, which gets the actuals from our general ledger system downloaded into it. But the auditor of state has said that we must give you a budget to actual report out of the general ledger system. That report is about 2,000 or 3,000 pages. So we will have to work out the details of how we best provide you information that you could use, but we could certainly do that. As it relates to our reserve for loan losses, and I noted that you changed in the information and included the Department of Development, we could certainly work on that because that's a requirement for our financial statements to have a reserve for loan losses. And the certificate of resources is mandated by the ORC, so we must do that, and we got that done in 2013. So I really don't have a problem with it, but we just want to present you with something that you could use, and we could work through the details on how we do that.
Okay. And one important and necessary provision in the financial policies legislation provides that when fiscal problems arise that threaten our reserve levels, the administration and council will cooperate in a planning process to correct the problem. Do you support this provision as part of the legislation?
I do.
Okay. And final question, what plan do you have in place to ensure that the public is able to quickly access call center assistance on tax bill matters and is able to pay taxes in person without waiting in a long line?
Councilman Miller, we definitely understand that there were some challenges with the systems as it relates to the call center, and the call center, hopefully you all understand, has been in existence since June of 2013. And the call center is something that no other county has, to my knowledge. And what that is another level of service on top of the existing people who answer the phone. So and perhaps you may have read, I guess there was an article in the local paper that suggested that people waited as long as 15 minutes for the phone to be picked up. And what we did is immediately threw additional people over, and that decreased it to a 10-minute wait. But what was not mentioned, that prior to that, the average wait time, I believe, was like 1 minute and 25 seconds. So this was the first time that this call center had ever answered tax calls, and we sent out 400,000 bills. But keep in mind, so in June, we'll have another tax collection, and the call center will be ready for that. But it's a different situation because at the end of the year, not only did we have tax bills, we had dog license, we had homestead applications, we had a number of other things that were happening at the end of the year. So we will judge. The good news is that we have the data, because if we didn't have the data, all we could rely on is what people say, and that's not real good for planning and moving forward. So we know come June, when the tax bills go out, that we need to have some people trained and ready to sit at that call center. So once we do perhaps the first week or the first couple of days and we look at our response time, then we could react appropriately. And we'll know next year in December that we'll probably need at least double. But there's some other options out there that we're exploring that I'm not willing, or I won't say willing, but ready to share at this point. And then the other thing is we have talked to IT. We also have the capability to do what's called web chat. So for those people who may not want to wait on the phone. They could actually be talking to a live person online, and maybe you've done that in your personal life. And another point that was missed in the publication is that they talked about calls that were hung up on. Well, one of the things that we do is do recordings to address the most common questions. So there are situations where people call in, they listen to the recording, and they've got their answer. So therefore, their solution has been given, and they're moving forward. So in addition to all of that, something that Executive Fitzgerald has missed, as well as Councilman Gallagher had mentioned, is that we need to make it clear to the public that the tax bills that we send out early are a courtesy. And there may be a situation where they don't get out before the end of the year. So we just need to put that information out there as early as possible so people are aware to go to the multiple avenues that we have available for them to get that information, to get it in the event that they don't get their bill. And we do have more options than any other county in the state to get your bills and to make payments.
I could follow up on that, but I'm going to pass because I'm sure there's other questions. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions? Mr. Jones?
Question, I'd just like to make a comment. I think over the last three years, I've had the opportunity to get many of my questions about you answered. And first, let me congratulate you for coming to this point. And I've had a good working relationship with you. I think you've done very well over these last 3 years. Any implication that you're not qualified in any way, I think is a falsehood, and it is not deserving to even be said in this meeting. You know the numbers, the facts. I think that's clear. But you also have been very compassionate when it comes to customer service and dealing with my constituents and concerns. You've been very clear with people, but you've also been compassionate. So I think that's important. I'll even go as far as to say just yesterday, knowing that you have to be here today, your answers were very honest and transparent yesterday in light of with a council who was very passionate and somewhat divided in a budget and finance meeting. And in light of this meeting, I thought your answers were very honest and very truthful. Just even in our disparity study, as you've mentioned, we've had a CFO change, but whenever I dealt with the CFO, it was many times we referred to you for questions. You've worked very hard on the disparity study, and we have created what is, I believe, a national model. So in spite of all of the changes, you've been a constant, a very consistent force, a very professional force, and one I've enjoyed working with over these last 3 years. So again, I congratulate you to this point.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Simon and then Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, and I too want to congratulate you on your nomination. My experience working with you, Mr. Parks, has been a good one. You've been responsive to constituent questions, and you've been available to help when needed, so I appreciate that. The one question I have for you is with regard to your presence in all these different departments and getting to know the staff and the people that work there and understanding, I'm sure you have great knowledge of how these operations are implemented, but how would you describe your presence there? Are you available? Are you there for all these different departments, for the employees, for the coworkers to be able to approach you? Open door policy, can you elaborate on that?
Thank you, Councilman Simon, for your comments. I am, but I will put a caveat into that. It'll be better when we move, because at this point, the fiscal office is actually in 2 separate locations, and then we have council, border control, and those type of meetings. We may be here, or I may be across the street at Courthouse Square, so I have probably not been as visible. But one of the things is, and I've been like this my entire life, and my sister is like that, and she's a very high level person. We're just not I don't want to say elitist, but I talk to the janitor just like I talk to the CFO. I mean, I have relationships with people throughout every organization that I work with, and my employees know that they could come to me. And one of the things that, if you were to look at the agendas for every staff meeting that we've had, every manager's meeting that I've had, employee morale is one of the topics, and every time we ask about how we can improve that, because what we must understand is, especially in the fiscal office, these employees have gone through a lot, because some of them worked for some very bad people, and they were lined up and put in that same pot with these people. And then you have multiple changes with leadership and fiscal, and they need some stability. And I quite honestly am that person, because I have been around in leadership and fiscal ever since this organization has started. So I think they have confidence in my knowledge. I think they have confidence in the fact that I will deal, as Councilman Jones said, fair and equitably, and when it needs to be stern, it is. But I think that they know me, and I think that they respect me.
I'm just going to do a follow-up. If you were to be confirmed, would you make yourself more available, even though you're in different buildings, to really spend more time with the different employees in the departments? Is that possible?
Absolutely. And I walk through all the time. I shake people's hand. I talk to them. I know their kids. I know my employees pretty good, I would say, and I am available.
All right, Mr. Gallagher. Thank you, Ms. Simon.
Congratulations to get to the seat you're sitting in today. After a rough start for this position, and I'll preface anything I'm about to say, is that I give the executive great leeway in his appointees as long as they're qualified. And certainly you're qualified. But you have had a run-up for us to observe the way in which you handle an office. And going to our rough start was when you were appointed to this, when we got the information, we made it very clear that your previous elected position would be, that you would resign immediately before our vote, as was the other candidate who was clerk of court. Clerk of court agreed, but up until the very last minute, literally the last minute, we were standing in that back room and you were refusing to resign your council seat. The last minute. That sent a red flag right up for me right away. I'm not asking you to explain, but that's exactly what happened. So I had concern with that. Then we got to the budget presentation, which was, I thought, your opportunity to grasp the brass ring and present as you can. And I know that there was a tight line between taking over and that timeline, a lot going on. The budget presentation from you, at best, was lacking. But I might attribute that to your hopping from place to place. And you have been a constant, and a consistent constant here, and I appreciate that. And finally, we had the mailing tax bill situation where it can be argued both ways that a vendor was, in essence, thrown under the bus by whomever. You were presented a fantastic opportunity to just take it on the chin, apologize, move forward, and you dug your heels in and refused, to the point where I was so frustrated I apologized to the people that were here. I didn't do anything wrong, but a leader, whether right or wrong in that situation, when you're either elected by the people to serve the people or you're appointed by those elected to serve the people, those leaders take that on the chin. And you failed to do that. And again, a red flag flew up. I don't think these rise to a no vote from me, but there are issues here. And I think you're now, if confirmed, going to have a period of 9 or 10 months to prove yourself once again. And if confirmed, I would hope that you take that opportunity and humble yourself. And if those opportunities arise where you take it on the chin, I would suggest you take it on the chin, because you're the guy at the top. And you had that chance and you walked away, and that told me a lot. So I'm gonna be watching. I don't think what I've said here rises to a no vote in any shape or form. We are, I am comfortable going forward with you, but I will be watching and hope that, again, if those opportunities come up, that you would take them. Thank you.
Mr. Jimana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just say that, when I talk about what's happened here in Cayuga County, one of the things I say is that in these positions, instead of having people run for them, that ultimately are dependent on a person like you that knows the nuts and bolts. We have people in positions because of their knowledge, their education, and their experience. And I think you exemplify that in this particular situation, because you've covered all the bases of the auditor, the treasurer, the recorder, and what I in particular like about what you presented is you just don't want status quo. You're not taking the job and let's just get this done and don't make any waves. You're making waves. How can we do this better? So if I had to hire you, or a person like, I would hire a person like you that is not happy with the status quo, that wants continual improvement. Now, there might have been some bumps in the road, but this idea of coming up with the call center is a great idea until you go through it. If you don't try to do improvement, you don't have any way of gauging. And Gerald first didn't want to make any waves, and he stayed in office for a lot of years. So I don't know if you would make a great politician, but I think from a technical and educational part, I think you're the poster child of why this Cayuga County experiment works. So you're definitely a yes vote for me.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? The procedure at this point is, if there's no other questions, is we could entertain a motion to move this to the regular council for a vote on our next meeting, which I believe is March 11th? Right.
Second.
By Mr. Brady and seconded by Ms. Simon to move this matter from the committee of the whole to the agenda of the regular meeting for passage. Is there any discussion on that motion? All right, all's in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. And we'll move this on to, I'm sorry, one no? Okay, so we'll move this on to the regular agenda for March the 11th. Thank you, Mr. Parks.
All right, thank you.
All right. We have the next item on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do you want to read that?
Yes, Madam Chair. Resolution number 2014-0040, a resolution authorizing a purchase and sale agreement with Playhouse Square Foundation in the amount of $1 for the sale of county-owned property commonly known as the Lowe's Building, located at 1501 Euclid Avenue, Cleveland, authorizing termination of the indenture of lease agreement as amended, authorizing the county executive to execute the agreement and all other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
You can remain seated. There's no reason for you to stand if you want to remain seated.
I prefer standing.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Oh, it's because of this?
No, I don't know.
I fell down in front of Councilman Greenspan's house. He's going to get a letter.
Nice thought.
Yeah.
On purpose, or was it the?
It's a booby trap.
It'll be in the letter. It'll all be in the letter.
Hey, don't laugh. I fell Saturday morning. So.
What were you doing in my house?
Spy detail. All right, thank you, Mr. Kelly, do you want to proceed?
Yeah, thank you, Council President. Thank you, council members. Nathan Kelly from the County Executive's Office, Deputy Chief of Staff. A little known fact, I was not in the Shaw High School marching band. But I am here today to tell a good story. What we're seeking from council today is your consideration to terminate a lease that we have with Playhouse Square for a property that we own that currently is the occupant, or where the current occupants are the State Theater and the Ohio Theater. We want to transfer that property called the Lowe's Building to Playhouse Square. Straightforward. In the late 1970s, Cuyahoga County stepped in at a critical time to acquire this property from certain demolition. We acquired the property and then promptly leased it to Playhouse Square. The purpose then was to solidify Playhouse Square as an institution and also to preserve this historic property for the betterment of the county, the city, and what is now the third largest arts district in the country. Playhouse Square is financially stable. The property is physically strong. It is a historic landmark that has received millions of dollars of renovations. It is time to declare victory on the action taken by the county in 1977 and return that property back to its rightful owner. Outcomes for Playhouse Square are that they get control of a property that has one very unique use. They can use it to continue the velocity of their growth, have the flexibility to program it as it should. The city is also free to the burdens of property ownership. In this case, you may be surprised to learn that we had an operating agreement with Playhouse Square to help fund the very significant capital costs, improvements and maintenance on that property that rose to a little bit over $1 million a year through past 2030. As a result, we'll save more than $1 million a year by transferring this property to Playhouse Square.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I've heard part of this presentation before, and I continue to have questions about it. But basically, the county bought this building, and then we leased it back, and they were paying us rent.
Correct.
And then at some point, the county started paying Playhouse Square money.
Correct.
Right. And then there was this lease that takes us to like 2020 something or something like that. There's an
Correct.
agreement where we have to pay them some money pursuant to this agreement for an extended period of time, right? Which is costing us $1 million a year, right?
Correct. The lease that we're seeking council approval to terminate.
I mean, I don't understand how we buy a building, then we lease it back, and we got to pay them $1 million a year.
Well, the lease and operating agreement has gone through some significant evolution since 1977. And I can't speak for the commissioners that made those decisions or the discussions that manifested themselves in what we now know as this lease agreement. However, I'm certain that we have a strong partner in Playhouse Square that realizes that the purchase has been met, and that the lease agreement that we currently have is one that they can sustain without the county's continued participation in the lease, and that it'd be better for our partnership if they continue to own the property and the county didn't provide.
So we're going to give them this building for $1, and then we
Correct.
no longer have to pay the $1 million, but there's a Playhouse Square board. Does the county have any representation on the Playhouse Square board?
I'm not
I mean, I know the city does.
sure.
If we're going to give them this building for $1, can we get some programs or something where, we can have some of our, the public, use it or get reduced rates tickets or something, or, some community groups can have some meetings there or something? I mean, it's a hefty ticket to go to the theater, and I don't know. I mean, I know there's an explanation here. I just have a problem that we're going to give away something that that has value. And we also have other properties that we can't seem to give away, that we should probably give away because we don't do a real good job of maintaining these vacant buildings, like the juvenile court and some other vacant properties. So I'm very unsettled about this situation. So I'm going to pass to Mr. Gallagher. Maybe he can ask some questions that will help illuminate me.
Thank you, Madam President. Actually, you hit on some of mine, but I recall as a youngster, the wrecking ball being on site, ready to knock these things down. And I assume that's what happened, that the county jumped in as the Cape Crusader. And literally, the wrecking ball was on site. No, I was very young.
Still is.
But you started interestingly saying, good news, this is going back to its rightful owner. We'll have put in $23,680,000 since '77 to present. I don't know of what they've put in. They're not even here, or are they here today? They're picking up a $23 million chip, and they're not even here. The only reason that we're here discussing this today is when we did our consolidations, this accidentally became public, and we all found out about it, and it's scandalous to begin with. There isn't a seat on the board, because I've researched this. I thought, how could something this scandalous continue to go on? And the answer is no one knew. There's no one at City Hall that knows or that is around from the days that this happened. There's nobody left in the county. There's no one in the county that can tell you anything about this agreement. And this is obviously researched a little bit better than I did. So the only reason we're happily here returning this to its rightful owner is because it accidentally got found, that we were spending $1 million on our own building that we've now put in $23,680,000, and we don't have a seat on the board. And that's not your problem or the administration's problem or our problem, but I think going forward, before this is to be given to someone, so that'll be $23,680,001, we need a few says on this board, and should have from the beginning. How that happened, I don't know. We can't answer for the past, but this is scandalous. This isn't good news. This is scandalous. And I'll tell you what, for the Playhouse Square board to remain silent since 1977 is even more scandalous. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. In my opinion, all they did, the county saved their butts, and they took $23 million of the taxpayers' money, and we had no say on that. It's about time we get our chair, and we should have front and center for the kind of money we put in. Here we go again. Cleveland lets Cleveland fall apart. The county comes in and saves it. The mayor and the council president get seats, and we don't. The county doesn't. Again, we're just being handed this. But before this goes through, we should have our administrator or the executive and the council president or a council representative seats on that board, and let them balk. This is something that should be down on Lakeside Avenue in the brown brick building being looked at. This is scandalous. So it's not good news. The rightful owners of that building are the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County. So before this is to be moved, we need seats on that board and finally have a say over the building that we own, that is ours. That wouldn't be there without the county, not Cleveland or that board. That board ought to be ashamed of themselves. That's all I gotta say.
Madam President.
Council President.
Did you have a response?
I'd like to respond to two items in particular. Firstly, it was no accident that we identified this as a property that we owned. County executive, one of his first actions in office was to identify all the properties where we had a lease and an ownership stake. So it certainly was no accident. Secondly, I would say that the purpose of the leasehold improvements that came from the county, I can't speak for the decision-making that happened at the time, but I would say that there, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a different mechanism than the one that exists today to provide support to the arts. We didn't have Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We didn't have the tobacco tax and settlement funds that went to support the arts. And so I think that what we see now is a very strong partnership in Playhouse Square that when we saw this lease and we said, guys, this is not the right way to support the arts, they agreed. And in so much as it may or may not be prudent for the county to have a board seat on the nonprofit boards, or multiple, I would say that the lease and the property transaction is not the manner by which to do that. I think that a conversation with the board of Playhouse Square and an acknowledgement that there is significant public investment that goes to this entity would be, I can't speak for them, but I would assume be well received. I wouldn't want to create a transaction where we're purchasing board seats, separate nonprofit board.
You would agree the rightful owners of that building are the citizens of Cuyahoga County, not that board, who graciously and gratefully took our millions upon millions of dollars and never once, as far as we know, we don't know, maybe the county commissioners were offered seats on the board and said no. We don't know.
That could be. This is a public asset, given the most pure lens by which we look through that acquisition in 1977, it was to preserve that asset for the public benefit. And that goal has been achieved. And we shouldn't be involved in it anymore. And that's why this is a good news. We can get
Okay, well,
away from
I mean,
this objective.
I agree moving this on is the right thing to do. When do we get our say on that board? It should have happened, it didn't happen. We have put, I would argue, more money into the Playhouse Square Foundation than anybody else. It's certainly more than Cleveland, and they have 2 seats on the board. I don't see the argument there. And again, this goes back, and at least we found it, and we're rectifying it. But I would like to see at least an offer of seats on that board to right that wrong. We should have had, there's no argument. We should have had somebody sitting on that board representing the people and the people's money. It wouldn't be there without the people of Cuyahoga County. It wouldn't be standing without the people of Cuyahoga County. That's all I'm saying. 2 seats on the board to equal the city of Cleveland, who put in nada. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Schrein, then Ms. Simon, Mr. Miller, Mr. Greenspan.
Well, and I want to echo my 2 colleagues in regards to that, in that we've been the good stewards and been there. And if it would follow the same course of normal business, you would expect that you would have been there at the very beginning. If we weren't there at the very beginning, we need to certainly be there at the very beginning of the transition, which is, I think, a very appropriate time to be having this conversation, Mr. Kelly. And also, in addition to that, there are plenty of opportunities that we should have naming rights to certain aspects of this. With $23 million would buy you naming rights to all kinds of stuff. And I remember only a few months ago when we were asked about the $4 million going in for the lighting and the chandelier. I remember asking specifically, what would be the county's naming rights be? And we were told that this was going to be done for the chandelier as part of that process. We were told not to, it would be taken care of. And guess what? All the naming rights to all those things that are going to be the most visible were given away to General Electric. So when that lighting ceremony, that chandelier is lit, it's being called the General Electric chandelier, not the $4 million that we stepped up as a council. We're the first ones there at the table, and I'm sure everybody has seen that. So therefore, here we are being asked to be good stewards, and with the taxpayers' money, and we were there when we've been there. And to ask for, not even to ask for, I think it's very appropriate that we would be at the table, and that some aspects should be named in the names of the people of Cuyahoga County who have put forth the $23 million and now the $4 million, and yet we still don't have recognition of any aspects of that came from the taxpayers to keep that alive. Thank you.
Do you want to respond or move on to Ms. Simon?
Well, the naming rights is something that doesn't really cost them a single thing other than that we should be at we clearly, if anything, that chandelier should have been named the Cuyahoga County chandelier for the because that's what was presented in this room, that we were the linchpin to get that whole thing started. There was only $1 million was on the table when they came before us, and we put the next $4 million on the table.
Ms. Simon?
Right, Mr. Schron, shame on us. You know, we said in the committee meeting, and perhaps we should have put some stipulations on it. We should have, I understand we asked, but maybe we should have been stronger in the ask and had legislation that would have mandated in that, so.
Figure at $23 million, we're now making the ask.
Okay. I want to know, first of all, the repairs and maintenance of this building, who's been maintaining and putting the money in for repairs at all these past years?
Most recently, Playhouse Square has been maintaining the property and upgrading it significantly clearly from the condition in which it was received as part of a lease in 1977. They've gone through $1 million of improvements, capital improvements, HVAC improvements, et cetera. If you go to the site, it's a grade A property. They do have an accounting of those improvements, which the Playhouse Square manages, operates, does on their own. We reimburse up to a certain threshold.
Can we get the amount that's been spent by the foundation of Playhouse Square, what they've actually put out?
Sure.
In relation to the $1 million? Okay. So this, I just want to be clear. So if we turn over the building, some council people are looking for a seat on the board and/or naming rights to something. Is that something that I'm not familiar in my work as an attorney with lease negotiations to ask for things like that? Do you think it's even feasible to start having those kind of discussions with Playhouse?
Yeah, I don't think it's the appropriate vessel to create a real estate transaction in order to have board seats. I think that we have a willing partner in Playhouse Square that would be willing to have that conversation independent of the transaction. You know, the disappointing part is that this transaction doesn't come with a time machine to go back to 1977 and ask for these things in advance.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that the use of the words, strong words here, don't describe this administration or this council, obviously. This deal was made before we were even in existence, so we are here now to set it right. And I'm in favor of unloading $23 million worth of a future obligation. Isn't that what we'll be doing?
Well, and I would agree with you, Councilwoman. I think
There's no order
that
here, I'm sorry. Is
the-
anybody listening? Okay.
that the $1 million in lease expense that the county has expended annually since 2007 is a price that any community would be willing to pay to have a community asset that we're blessed to have here in Cleveland.
Well, what would happen if we didn't do this?
We would continue to pay a lease in which we're indentured through 2037 and pay them at least $1 million per year, plus escalators for cost increases.
Okay.
And
Mr. Brady wants to raise
Just
something.
just as a follow-up on
You're out of
this.
the line.
But we all know, I mean, quite obviously, there's a lease here, and when is the next payment due? How does this work?
It's a biennial payment, so the next payment is for a little bit north of $500,000.
When?
Second quarter. I would add, one of the big pictures that's being, looking back on the expense so far is failing to see the potential savings of transferring this property of about $24 million a year. I mean, my encouragement to the council is say yes, declare victory, and make this a right, make this the right thing.
No, question is, when is the next payment due?
Second quarter of 2014.
So when is that? April, May, so we got some time, okay.
Yeah, Madam President, just so you know, I am in favor of saving the future payments on this lease. It's a lot of money, and maybe there's a separate conversation we can have with the Playhouse about this in terms of a lease negotiation.
Just to follow up, I think that, I don't think anybody on the council wants to continue to pay, for this building since 1977. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is, we need to talk to, there needs to be a discussion between us and the folks over there and settle this issue of our relationship with them. It seems to me like we have contributed enough to demand to get some respect. I'm not saying we're not getting it. I'm not saying what you're proposing is wrong. It's right, but the fact that this body may want representation is, I think, quite reasonable, and I don't see anything wrong with the timing of it.
We're going to keep, I plan to recommend that we keep this in committee, but Mr. Miller, Mr. Greenspan, Mr. Jones all had comments, so we will have an opportunity to revisit this. So if you don't want to make your comments now, we'll have an opportunity to revisit it at our next committee of the whole when we set it again.
Okay, Madam Chair, do we have an appraisal or other indication of what the building is worth?
We don't have a third-party appraisal. The assessed value on our site, or appraised value on the county's website, is about $13.4 million.
And just a comment that that I know there's some going forward discussions that could take place, but I'm on the good news side of this. The city of Cleveland, we're now somewhere, I don't know whether it's 25th or 30th or somewhere down there in population size in the United States, and we've got one of the very top arts districts in the country, and I think that's very special. The people in the 70s and 80s, they did what they had to do, and I'm glad they did it, and we should say that was fine, but now this is now, and we should do what makes sense now. Thank you.
Mr. Greenspan?
Great, thank you. Mr. Miller asked one of my questions, fair market value, 13.4, although no appraisal, just what's on our tax digest, correct?
Correct.
Did we, during the process of evaluating our buildings, did we put this, we own this, correct?
Correct.
Did we put it up for sale?
Not to my knowledge.
Why?
One of the strategy, I was not part of the property disposition process, but when we look at the potential use of this site, it is limited to one potential use, and I don't think that this council or county executive would want to be in a position where we sell what is 2 theaters of Playhouse Square to a user that could be somebody besides Playhouse Square, and run the risk of either finding an owner that wanted to create a scenario that holds Playhouse Square, the institution, and community asset hostage, or becomes hostile to the district, or shuts it down, or turns it into a parking lot. So because of the unique dynamic of that property and its use, it isn't appropriate to offer it up to public sale.
Well, but we offer other, this I think would be a very marketable asset. You've got a business in there that's generating revenue, presumably. You've got a business that may have, I would assume, the ability to pay rent. It's in a prime location in downtown Cleveland as it relates to the viability of an arts district. I would think this would be a very desirable piece of property for someone to hold into their portfolio. They've got a ready-made tenant. Isn't that what rent, when you purchase a property for rent, one of the attractive components is that you have a tenant that has the sustainability to be there for a long time.
I agree with everything you said.
And we could stipulate in the sale that the use should be limited to, or restricted, we could do restricted use covenants within the sale to ensure that the asset itself is used as it's currently being used.
I agree with everything you said. I wouldn't want to negotiate on behalf of the public in public, but I would say this. It is a very narrow universe of users. It's one. It makes the value of the property very static. And if you have a user that is different than the property owner, that is not acting in the best interest of the institution or the public, you could command usurious rents. And that could sink the foundation. It could undermine the whole purpose of the acquisition in 1977 to begin with. And for that reason, we wouldn't want to offer it up to an open sale.
Is Playhouse Square interested in owning it, selling it to them?
Yes, and that's why we've asked council to
Other than
transfer
for
the
a dollar,
property to
for
them.
fair market value?
Well, I think that releasing us from a $24 million obligation in nominal dollars is demonstrating an act of partnership to forego what is certain income to take the property and its ownership today.
If we, so it's interesting, so we own a building that we're paying someone else rent.
That we're reimbursing for capital expenses and improvements.
What are the
Maintenance.
breach provisions? What if we don't give them their check in Q2?
So I would ask that council direct those sorts of questions to our legal team, but I would also let you guys know that we've asked those same questions of council before bringing this to council.
So are you saying that's an executive
Council
session?
EL
Yeah.
before bringing it to council IL.
Right, so you're saying that would be an executive session discussion? Because it could involve possible real estate?
I have an opinion from our law department, and I want council to get its own opinion if it's necessary.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll do that in subsequent meetings to this.
Madam President, I know we're out of time. I think these legal questions need to be addressed by the appropriate people, not Mr. Kelly, but I will say that the covenants on these leases are not in perpetuity. So whatever, we can't constrain the future use of this building. And that it's really important piece to this is we want to preserve the Playhouse Square district, and there's no mechanism for perpetuity to preserve that. So that's really a piece that I think council needs to realize, even before we go to our council.
Well, then we should sell it to Playhouse Square as the intended user for a fair market value price instead of $1. We remove ourselves from $1 million a year liability, and we sell an asset for a price, a fair market value price.
This is more than fair market value. We're being relieved of $23 million lease obligation.
Right, so we'll sell it to them for 13.4. They come
Can I
ahead, we
make a
come ahead.
recommendation that we discuss these things not on the public record?
All right, I think Mr. Jones has a question, and I think,
think
that we'll
talking
be
price in
back.
public's a
This will
bad
be a
idea.
continuing discussion, so we'll have to have some conversation with our legal counsel and some more information. But Mr. Jones?
My one question is, and Councilman Greenspan did ask one of my initial questions, but when we did our property consolidation, we were told these are the properties the county owns. I understand the rationale for not mentioning this particular property, but what I'd like to know is, are there any other properties that the county owns that we were not made aware of at that moment, regardless of your rationales?
Well, I'm not aware that the predicate of your question is correct, that it wasn't shared that we own this property. We do know that it wasn't part of the immediate, I do know that it wasn't part of the immediate sale process. So I can't answer your question, but I will talk to my colleagues to make sure that we do present a full accounting of all the properties that the county owns.
Maybe what you can do is resubmit that original list that may have had the property, or add to the list any properties that were not a part of the original list.
Certainly. We might be able to clarify it right now.
Lifeline, call a friend, call.
Thank you. Thank you. Bonnie Tewan, Director of Public Works. The Lowe's building was part of the study, so they did review the lease agreement, if that's what you want to refer to it as. So it was part of that study. As Mr. Kelly acknowledged that, we of all the properties that we wanted to sell, this was not one of them that we wanted to put in at the current time. The list of our sale properties. So, I mean, we can.
Was a part of the original.
Yes, it was a part of the original study.
Okay.
At this point, we've had a lot of questions, and there's a lot of issues have been raised. So I'd like to, refer this back to this committee, and we will then set it for a further hearing. I don't know that we need to set a date today. We can probably do it on the 11th, but we have to do it the next meeting when we get our questions answered, because this is certainly a very, very complicated issue and something that's very important to all of us. So we appreciate your presentation today, and we'll be looking forward to getting more information on this point. Is there any other miscellaneous business for this meeting? Any other public comment unrelated to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, the committee of the whole stands adjourned. We'll be ready for our regular meeting at 5 o'clock.